Good evening and welcome to episode 28 of the Jacksonian. As I have with me is the host of Locked On UConn, Mark Zanetto, as we'll be going over the latest on UConn basketball, the Big East tournament preview, what's going to happen to the rest of UConn sports if UConn football decides they're going to be leaving their independence in college football amongst the topics. And let me tell you, it's going to be a wild show. How you doing tonight, Mark?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a lifelong UConn fan, and I started following the team as a kid in a year after Jim Calhoun came to UConn, so about 1987, and that's kind of when I started being more aware of how much my father enjoyed the team. It started to get real good in 89, 90. They made a run to the Elite Eight. They were a one seed out of the East and had a really great, unbelievable press. And that's when like Husky Mania took off. And I would say 1989, 90 in the beginnings of the Big East when I was a young kid and my dad was watching. UConn was lucky to get out of the 8-9 game, and then they had a run where they won, the Big East and were four in the country and got a one seed. So, yeah, I mean, I've covered college basketball on and off for about 10 years independently for a couple different publications here in North Carolina. Some mid-major basketball, most of the SoCon, and right in my neck of the woods, UNCG, those areas with Wes Miller and even Steve Forbes over at ETSU, both guys who have moved on to Cincinnati and Wake Forest, respectively.
I love the UConn thing behind you. That's pretty awesome.
Thanks. Yeah.
Welcome. Yeah. Well, we're going to get this started off with Wednesday night's matchup against Marquette. Now, UConn had a lot of trouble on the road against ranked teams, but this time they slayed the dragon that was the road on against the ranked teams. What was your takeaway from that game?
Yeah, I don't. It's such a crazy, wild stat that they hadn't beaten a ranked team since 2014, the last national champion outside of 23. That Shabazz Napier led team beat Memphis, who I think was like 17th in the country, and they were in the AAC. So I think part of that is not being in the Big East for 7 years too. I don't think it's as true of an indicative of how good of a team or the program is, because we all know how many titles they won and the pedigree that UConn has. I think part of the reason why they haven't beat a ranked team in how many years before a couple nights ago is because they really haven't had a ton of chances. The American Conference didn't have four or five teams that were ranked, so you didn't get like multiple options to do it like a lot of the Big East does, like Big 12, etc. So I think that's part of it. The takeaway that I had from that game was UConn was shot 50% from three, had a huge rebounding advantage, including 16 offensive rebounds. When UConn plays well, even though the game was a 7-point game, their good is better than anyone else's good. And their okay is sometimes better than everyone else's good right now. They have a lot of options, and that showed because they didn't need Klingon to dominate the way he did at Seton Hall. They had Cam Spencer kind of run the show. This time, Alex Caravan broke out of a slump. So you really don't know. It's a joke I used to make. UConn is like the line from Forrest Gump. They're like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Oh man, that's hilarious, man. I always love that line from Forrest Gump.
It's true.
Lieutenant Dan. Oh man.
Yeah.
But tomorrow is going to be a matchup against Providence, and it's going to be a big one. What's your preview for that game? What's your key to victory for UConn?
Typically a tough game. Providence is always up for the challenge. I joked around with Providence fans on my show that they're kind of like the Red Sox before they broke the curse. No one really took them serious, and they're kind of like little brother in the. They're not really that they want to be our rival. They're really not. It's kind of like the way NC State talks about Carolina. Carolina really doesn't respect them. They don't like them. They beat them. It's an in-state rivalry, but we're 40 miles away. It's a different state, but it's a quick little drive, and it doesn't mean anything for UConn, but that's not how Dan Hurley operates. I think this week, to go back to Seton Hall, which is a revenge game for first loss in the Big East this year. They avenged that, won by 30. They go to Marquette. They've already won the Big East regular season title. They win that game easily. It was 14 points with 8 minutes to go. Marquette made a little run. We weren't really nervous. UConn wins the game. Now they go to Providence, our rival, quote unquote, right? And I think the Big East did us a favor here, because going into the Big East tournament, I think a lot of teams would, take it easy. Hey, we're going to make sure everyone's healthy, all that BS. And Dan Hurley just doesn't operate that way. I think he wants to rip Providence's heart out and say, you're not using us to get a springboard into the NCAA tournament. Because if Providence wins this game, they're going to the tournament. Oh, yeah. If they, but if they don't, they're going to host an NIT game. That's just the reality of this game. So it means that much more to Providence. But it also means that we can play a kind of a spoiler, which is kind of fun. And to go in there and just, beat them by, I think we're a 9.5 point favorite going in on the road with nothing to lose. I think that's also part of it too. If you go into that game and you're UConn, as good a team as this is, and you just play fast and loose, they could beat you by 20. They could also lose by 4 or 5, but I think it's going to be somewhere like the Marquette game, where they kind of continue the progression of being a good team and passing the ball, and everyone gets involved, and then UConn ends up winning. I could see them winning by over 15. I could see them squeaking by with a 4 or 5 point victory. I don't see Providence being able to hang with them shot for shot in a 40-minute game, even at home. They're going to ride the wave of senior night, and then it's going to come back down to earth.
Memo to me, do not bet on that game.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch it. That's a really good, as part of a parlay as the money line, maybe, but I think you could go either way with this, because I think if you get a situation where UConn plays a little undisciplined, maybe their mind wanders a little bit and Providence catches fire, kind of like what happened with Creighton, you could, you end up losing by double digits. But I think Dan has them firing on all cylinders so that doesn't happen.
Well, I'm going to be excited to watch this game tomorrow night for sure. And I was just thinking about the Big East tournament for 2024. What's your preview for that? Do you think St. John's can have a little surprise run because of Rick Pitino's venting session, or are they not ready for that?
They've definitely. I mean, it's almost like when that thing happened, it's almost like people didn't realize that Rick Pitino's a Hall of Fame coach. You can have your opinion on whether you think he's a good person, which I don't think anyone really does. But you can't say anything about him as a coach. So utilizing that motivation in the media, kind of playing everyone like a fiddle, and then miraculously his team starts playing better. It's almost like if you call people out, they're either going to rise to the occasion or they're going to crumble, right? And so it just depends on the bracket. Let's take a look at the bracket, shall we?
Absolutely.
I don't know where Seton Hall is. There it is. As of right now.
Obviously, UConn's won.
Correct. Let's see. So we got UConn as the 1. 4-5 is the Marquette right now.
Right.
I think if the game started today, actually, I think that's just last year. No.
Yeah.
That's the women's tournament. My fault.
Okay, man. Good. Seton Hall is 4. And St. John's of Villanova and Providence are fighting for that 5th spot.
It's St. John's is it'll all depend on where they end up at the end, like the last game at the end of the year, right? So wherever the it's kind of hard to gauge, but if they can stay away from UConn, they could end up facing UConn in the finals. I could see that. But I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be Creighton and UConn. They're the two best teams. Marquette is close, but I don't think Tyler Kolek is going to play. I think they're going to save him for the NCAA tournament. I'm not a huge Tyler Kolek fan in terms of his impact, but he's a good player. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So I think the teams that really need wins that are on the bubble, if Providence loses, they need to win like 2 or 3 games to have a chance. That's likely not going to happen. I think Villanova is in, and I think Seton Hall is in. St. John's needs to do some work, and Butler's definitely out. They have a good net ranking, but they're just not a true bubble team. So the Big East going to end up getting 5 teams, maybe 6. That's what's going on. Also, what's cool about the Big East this year is they're actually doing something that they've never done before, and they're honoring Big East legends of both the men's and women's game. And one of my all-time favorite UConn players will be there. The all-time leading scorer, Chris Smith. He's being honored. So shout out Chris Smith.
Let's go, Chris Smith. Well, and I was also looking at some of the strengths and weaknesses for UConn. I noticed that the assists are one of the strengths per game. That they're one strengths, but the blocks, they seem to be like somewhat of a weakness. Can they fit some of their weaknesses to the point where they can possibly repeat for the first time since Florida did it?
Are you Jackson? Are you a movie fan? Are you a big movie fan?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie Jaws?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
There's a great quote in that movie. It says, "See, a great white is a perfect killing machine. All it does is eat, sleep, and make baby sharks. All UConn does is eat, sleep, and win basketball games. They get it done on the defensive side. They get it done on the offensive side. Do you need shooters? We have Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton. Do you need height? We got a 7'3" Donovan Clingan, who's probably the most impactful player in college basketball. I think he is. Do you need a stud point guard who's 6'6", who can be the best on-ball defender? We have that. We have Alex Karaban, who's a little bit of everything. Can shoot threes, can rebound, can play the 5 if you needed to. And we have a great backup point guard. There isn't an area of the game that I'm worried about UConn against someone else. Block shots, I think, is a stat that if there was a stat in college basketball that was almost blocks, where someone has to make a decision at, they're driving downhill and they see Donovan Clingan and they go, well, that's a business decision. I'm gonna dribble back out or kick it back out to somebody else. He'd probably average like 5 or 6 a game if people actually tried to come at him. You know what I mean? So it's not the blocks. It's the moments where he steers someone away and then the other players stay at home. The only games they've lost is when they've lacked discipline at staying at home on 3-point shooting. That's the only games they've lost all year. 3 games. So I do think if you said right now, are they going to repeat? I'm going to say yes. If something happens, knock on wood, someone gets injured or there's self-inflicted wounds, the only team that can stand in UConn's way is UConn.
I'll definitely be watching for UConn to repeat. I mean, right now I'm choosing between UConn and Houston.
I like Houston. That's a good one. I thought you were going to say Purdue, and I was going to give you my reasons why. But it's funny. There was a report that came out about which teams play well against other elite players, and I think it's an analytical tool. I can't remember. There's like 4 or 5 different ones, and everyone uses Ken Pom or it's not Ken Pom, but it's one of the others. The lesser of the known ones, but they're all predicting similar things. They predicted that UConn has the best games against elite talent, and there was only 6 or 7 title contenders. UConn, Purdue, I think Duke was in there. They were more on the lower end. And then they also said, I think Carolina was in there, and they were also saying which teams could win one game or make a long run. So it's actually a pretty cool thing. I'll send it to you. It's a pretty interesting one, just so you can kind of inform yourself on, like, if you're doing a bracket, like who do I want to pick to potentially, upset, or what's a 3 or 4 seed that I think could make the Final Four. So it's a pretty cool one, and it's predictive. But UConn's measurables are here, and unfortunately, even though Houston is in the title contending, they were the lowest, which is weird because I think their metrics show that when they play against elite talent, their defensive stats go way down. When someone punches them in the mouth, when they can't physically dominate you, like the way that they play defense, they look really good against weak teams, and they look okay against good teams. They're still winning. Don't get me wrong, but I think that's what that analytics showed.
Well, I will say you won't have to tell me to put Purdue as national champions or Final Four, because I'll tell you right now, they're just a disaster in the postseason. And same with Tennessee. It's like they're great in the regular season, but they're horrible in the postseason.
I will say this about Tennessee. I've been impressed with Tennessee, and I won't say this because my wife is a UT fan. But what I will say is the reason why I'm impressed with them is by bringing in Dalton Connect and having some guys step up on offense. They've allowed Vescovi and Josiah Jordan-James to essentially be role players, and that's what's elevated them to, average, from an average, like, we're going to be a Sweet 16 team, to an actual national title contender. It wouldn't, if for some reason, if my top pick, UConn, obviously, was to lose, I will definitely root with Tennessee with my wife, just because, got to. Happy wife, happy life. So that's where I would go. I'm not picking them because every time I do pick Tennessee, they lose. So I will not be picking them in the Final Four. But as far as from a rooting interest, it wouldn't surprise me. It also wouldn't surprise me if Purdue makes a long run, because they could follow that Virginia path of losing that crazy game to a 16 seed and then making a run to the tournament. I also, and I'm not going to say who told me this, but I have very good knowledge, and I don't want people to freak out and say that things are fixed and all this other stuff, because they're not. But I guarantee you, last year, who made the Final Four last year, Jackson? Who were the teams? You had UConn.
Yep, UConn, San Diego State, Miami, and Florida Atlantic.
So 2 of those are essentially mid-majors. And you had an ACC school and a Big East school. I have on good authority that the NCAA tournament is like, that ain't happening this year.
Well, honestly,
they don't want it to happen. It's great. Listen, I think people love the underdog, right? Don't you love when you see an underdog team? Where do you hate the underdog? Where do you hate it?
I love the underdogs. I just don't like it when they get at my teams.
Right. You don't like it when they beat your teams. And so my point is like that. But then the reason why the NCAA tournament hates it is because they love it for ratings in those first, second, third, even Elite Eight. But when it gets to the Final Four, and these are the only 2 standalone games, they don't want San Diego State and UConn in the final. They want Kansas, UConn, Duke, and North Carolina, because those are 4 pretty much blue bloods to go in, and then you have all these fan bases, and everyone, even casual fans, watch. But if you have Butler and UConn again, I'm watching. Butler crazy fan is watching. You're watching. But my, mother-in-law is probably not watching. But she would watch because some, people at bars, like, it's just a ratings thing. No one's saying they're going to fix it, but I would imagine Purdue gets propped up more than anything I've ever seen in my life. How many times Zach Edey gets fouled in a game? It's like Shaq from 1994. It's kind of amazing. So I don't see them losing early unless something absolutely wild happens.
I'll definitely be keeping my eye on that. But I do wish we could see like more mid majors in like the Final Fours, and like not more non blue bloods. I think it's great for the game.
I mean, I'm with you there. Listen, I covered mid-major basketball. I think there's a lot of teams that deserve a shot. I think big time college basketball ends up taking really a shortcut in the regular season, because I don't know how much you know about this, but like the scheduling of college basketball is done years in advance. And if I'm a really talented mid-major in let's say the Big South. High Point's had a great year. If right in my backyard, if they try to schedule someone to come play at High Point at this beautiful arena on their campus, probably holds like 5,000 or 6,000. It's unbelievable. First class facility. They're not getting anybody to come. You have to go to the road and you have to play a bye game against Kentucky, against Duke, against whoever. Even if you're a good team, sometimes you don't even get those bye games. People don't want to lose to you. So it's a double-edged sword. So it's like, oh, you didn't play anybody. It's like, well, no one wants to play us. So that's the problem sometimes, the inequities of college basketball. I mean, I'm a UConn fan. They're at the top, but I've seen the other side of it too.
Oh man, that's pretty cool that you worked at mid-major basketball. That's pretty. That is so.
Yeah, it's definitely, listen, if you love basketball, you can find joy in almost every level. So is mid-major basketball the same talent as me, turning on a game and watching UConn play Marquette or Creighton on FS1? No, but to sit there front and center in the media pit or whatever and cover games for a conference or a game and see some really fantastic players is always a fun time too.
I'll tell you, I'm glad that we're talking about this because I want to ask you this next question because you've covered college basketball for a lot of your life. What are your favorite memories of March as a UConn fan and as a college basketball fan?
Sure. First one that comes to mind is the very first taste of March when I was a kid. UConn made a run to the Elite Eight, and in the Sweet 16, they played Clemson, and they were up 16 points with about 8 minutes to go in the second half, and they gave up the lead entirely, and they're down one with 1 second left. They had a full court pass, and Scott Burrell, who played in the NBA for I think 10 or 12 years, also was a first round pick of the Seattle Mariners. So he had this incredible arm, was an all-state quarterback. So he threw this 84-foot pass, a better pass than Grant Hill to Christian Laettner the following year that everyone remembers, to Tate George on the baseline, who took it, pivoted against Eldon Campbell, former Laker, and hit a shot at the buzzer with 1 second left, and UConn went to the Elite Eight. That was my very first moment of like jumping up and down, losing my mind. I remember being on my mom's bed with a TV that's smaller than my screen that I'm doing this podcast with you on, and just having that moment. It was just pretty amazing. Outside of that, some quick ones are Bryce Drew, Valparaiso, great pass where it was kicked to him for a three. God, there was another one, a USC player, no, Georgia Tech, the James Forrest, I think his name is. He hit a kind of a fadeaway 3-pointer. Probably check the name on that, but I know his last name was Forrest, and his son ended up playing at Georgia Tech, I think, later. So that's, you show how old I am. But and then most recently you had Carolina, you had Luke May, his brother Drake May, now in the NBA in the NFL draft. Luke May hitting a shot to send, I think it was I don't know if it was it Elite Eight. I think they went to the Final Four. It was Kentucky against Carolina, and he hit a fadeaway little shot to win it. There's been so many great ones. Also some heartbreak for UConn. Losing that same year that Tate George hit that shot, Christian Laettner hit a buzzer beater against them the following day. That started my hatred of Duke at an early age of 9. And then 98, year before they won the title, Rip Hamilton hits a game winner against Washington, the Washington Huskies game against, and in the Sweet 16. They lose in the Elite Eight to Carolina, the eventual champion. So it was I mean, I think the thing about being a UConn fan is people forget there was a time when I was growing up where people were like, UConn's good, but they can't win the big one. Calhoun can't get to the Final Four. He can't win a national championship. And then it happened in 99 as a senior in high school. And after that, it kind of exploded. They won again in 04, won 11, 14, now 23. So hopefully we got another one coming.
Well, I always have the memory of Cardiac Kimba in the 2011 Big East quarterfinals. Like, I came home after school. It was like 5 minutes. I saw the game where I was like, "Oh my God, this happened!"
Yep.
And 2016 in the AAC quarterfinals when Jalen Adams made that
Yeah.
big game tying shot to force fourth overtime.
Yeah, I remember that game. I was actually I think I was on my way to a wedding and I was watching it on my phone. And I was like in the car going like, oh my God, yeah, he made that shot. Yeah, that was a good one. Jalen Adams is an underrated UConn player. Those AAC teams, all those guys, super underrated. I think they went under the radar. That hat back there is the logo of the 99 Final Four. That team, like there's so many great UConn teams. Like the 96 team played against UCLA, and was it 96? Ray Allen's team. They won the Big East tournament. That team was easily the second best team in the country that year. They lost in the Elite Eight to UCLA, who ended up winning the title. So there were plenty of teams before they won their first that could have easily been the first. 99, 94 with Danielle Marshall. They got upset in the Sweet 16 by Florida, who ended up going to the Final Four. Danielle Marshall missed a couple of easy free throws, was like an 85% free throw shooter. He choked. Danielle Marshall, love you, but that happened, right? That's just those are the breaks, you know. A lot of good team. 06 team lost to George Mason with 7 players that played professionally, 6 in the NBA. So it's like, as much as I think this UConn team is unstoppable, I always go back to, listen, I cover them. They're unstoppable in my brain, but when it comes to March, anything can happen.
That is true. And, I'm glad we mentioned a little bit about the AAC, and I'm glad that UConn is back in the Big East, so to speak. But now we know UMass is leaving for the MAC in all sports. They're leaving the Atlantic 10. So let's say UConn leaves the Independence. We don't know when. It could be after this year or next year. We don't know.
Right.
What's going to happen to the men's basketball program and the women's basketball program and the other sports? Are they going to have to say goodbye to their friends in the Big East, or are they safe in the Big East?
I don't think anyone's safe in any conference. That would be my first thing. I mean, think about it. Florida State just applied to leave the ACC. I mean, after they got left out of the college football playoffs, so they're suing to not pay their whatever that's called, like where they have to leave and they leave early, so they owe the ACC $90 million or something crazy like that. So I don't think that I could say there's a good option, and I know there's rumors about the Big 12, especially with Oklahoma and Texas leaving next year for the SEC. Now I know Arizona and Colorado are coming in. I wouldn't hate a Big 12 UConn team that would also elevate their football program, because we all know in order for basketball to continue to succeed at a high level, there has to be some revenue coming from the football team. Some. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to be great. I mean, Kansas has had a awful football program for 50 years and they're still pretty good in basketball. So you can do it. I mean, even Duke, I can't stand Duke. Can't stand it. Can't stand what they stand for. I respect their coaches and their players, kind of. But I can't stand the logo. I can't stand anything that Duke is about. But they've sucked in football for years. They're pretty good last year. They got ranked, played Notre Dame pretty tough. But it's like, you can do it. But in the new era of what college is about, I know that UConn is making a lot of investments into NIL, investments into these collectives, investments into groups to help kind of push their initiatives. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Big 12 came calling, if they made a business decision and said, we love our friends in the Big East. We love playing in Madison Square Garden. But if we have to go play a Big 12 tournament because we have home at homes against Kansas, against Houston, against Texas Tech, I mean, Cincinnati, like an old AAC foe, I wouldn't hate it. And also I can go visit my friend Wes Miller at Cincinnati and wear my UConn hat and sit in the front row. That'd be funny. But no, I it's one of those things. Would it suck to leave the Big East? Absolutely. I missed the Big East when we went to the AAC. Winning a title in 14 didn't kind of help that a little bit. But it's business is business, man. And if the Big 12 comes calling, and you're going to put your football team and invest in getting more recruits because of you're in the Big 12, I think you'd see a quick turnaround. Jim Mora is not an AAU coach. The guy is a pretty good football coach, right? So I think we could do it. But that's my answer. Nobody's safe. It's funny you use UMass as the catalyst for that question. I haven't thought about UMass being relevant in probably 20 years. I don't mean that as a slight to you. I kind of I kind of think it's funny because UMass has been so irrelevant since they had that kind of crazy, like what mirrored UConn, right? Kind of a small school that started to ascend, and then Calipari went there and essentially paid for players. They had stuff come out with Marcus Camby and all that group. So it's just funny. They've done, UConn has been here, and UMass has done this. As far as their entire program, this is nothing against their kids. I'm sure they work really hard, but the only thing I'm worried about, the only thing I'm thinking about at UMass is taking one of their players in the transfer portal next year. That's it.
Well, I will say though, Frank Martin's kind of feeling like
I like Frank Martin a lot. You know what I have in common with Frank Martin?
What's that?
If I ever met Frank Martin, I would shake his hand and say, I appreciate you. He is of Cuban descent, and so am I. And he reminds me so much of my uncles. Just a real hard nose, no nonsense. This is the way it's supposed to be. You're gonna do it the right way the first time. I admire Frank Martin a lot. I think he's gonna do a great job there. He does a great job everywhere. I'm talking UMass as a whole should give him a lifetime contract because he'll get your program to where it's gonna be, where it needs to be.
Well, I will say though, if he can get them, because I don't think he's going to get them to March Madness this year, but if he can get them to March Madness next year, he's going to have a lot of schools calling, especially in the Big East.
I could see that. I mean, he went to Final Four with South Carolina. He's a really good coach. I don't know, man. I think he needs. Sometimes you just need to go back to your roots of just being a coach, and you don't have to worry about. Some of these guys get older, and I don't know how old Frank Martin is, but he's got to be in his late 50s. I would imagine he's content with his career, even though I know he's competitive and he's got a competitive fire. It would have to be something that fits culturally, right? I don't think he wants to go and be at a school where he has to deal with a lot of one and dones and the NIL stuff. I think that's part of why he went to a smaller school. Play in the MAC, win the MAC, have a happy life and do what you love, which is coaching.
Maybe he can turn UMass into the Gonzaga of the MAC. That would be neat.
Maybe. Wouldn't surprise me. He's a great coach.
That would be neat. And the last question I got for the show is, can Gino Arima lead UConn women's basketball to yet another national champion
this year? God, it's hard to bet against South Carolina right now. As good as UConn women has been in Gino Auriemma as a coach in his Hall of Fame career, and I will get into, for anybody that watches this, I will get into UConn women once the tournament starts. To listen, it's a daily show. We got to fit in a bunch of different topics, and I think because I also feel like too. Not that there's not a lack of coverage for men's sports, and I think that's a silly thing, but it's one of those where the men are driving the boat right now. The women have for years, and it's not going to change anytime soon, I don't think. And I think the UConn women are, think about it, it's like an off year for them, and I think they're still in the top 10. So
wow.
The standard is set. Gino has done an amazing job. Paige Buckers is coming back from an ACL. She's played an incredible year so far. I think they lost. Can't think of her name off the top of my head, but they lost a big time scorer, and I think that's kind of derailed their chances. I would say no. I don't think it's their time. I think you go chalk, and South Carolina's winning it all on the women's side, and but yeah, I wouldn't. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see another year where I'm sorry I yawned. I'm getting old, man. It's
It's
almost
okay.
8:30 my time. Um, but I would love to see basketball. It says if you know anything about UConn, it says on their court at both the places they play, the basketball capital of the world. And I don't there's truth to that. Between the UConn men and women, the amount of titles that they've won is indicative of that. So be great to see them win it and have the men win a back-to-back title and kind of cement that.
That'll be neat. I mean, like the women's basketball, I don't know all that much except for like Connecticut, Caitlin Clark at Iowa, and South Carolina, Stanford, and I know Pat Summit from Tennessee. I know a little bit about the Connecticut Tennessee women's basketball rivalry, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, and to go back to what I was saying, Ozzie Fudd is the guard I believe that is out for the year. But UConn's got a good team. I mean, I think what people don't understand about Paige Buckers too is everyone is familiar with Caitlin Clark, but Paige Buckers was playing at that level before, when she was a freshman. And they just she's had injury problems, right? And I think what Gino lacks in terms of his team this year is size. They got a lot of girls that are 5'11", 6 foot, but they don't have that 6'8", 6'7" girl that they've had in the past, 6'5". They do have one on the roster. I don't think she plays that much. So I think that's what's been lacking. But listen, he is going to get them back to winning a title. I can guarantee that. I would say that with as long as he's the coach there, I have no doubt that they end up winning another title in the next 2 or 3 years.
That's for sure. And I gotta say, it's gonna feel weird. Like when that day comes, it's gonna feel weird not seeing him as head coach. It's
When
like,
he
oh,
retires,
oh yeah.
yeah, I mean, I see that. Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you think that the college game is flat, as some people have, in the media have kind of put that narrative out there that the men's game, there's not enough stars, there's not a lot of great teams, which I think is silly. But in your opinion, do you see that at all as a basketball? I know you're kind of a basketball junkie, but I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I'm not the world's biggest basketball junkie. I'm more of a college football junkie, but
Sure.
no, I don't think the game is flat. I just think the people have to go look for the stars wherever.
Yeah, I did have Aaron Torres on yesterday, and he said that the ESPN, he works for Fox. He said, but not having UConn, who's the dominant team this year, and even Purdue, which is on Fox a lot, um, the two top teams in the country are rarely on ESPN. He's like, so I think sometimes that narrative gets pushed because the conversation is generally led by ESPN, whereas football, College Game Day on ESPN does a great job, but they also have the big Fox game day that they have too, and those kind of rival each other. They get the same amount of ratings, but as far as that for Fox and ESPN and basketball, ESPN still dominates the basketball conversation. So it's a good point. I think that's why I think most people see it that way. So it's a perception, it's not the reality.
True. And before we get out of here, I
Yeah.
couldn't help but notice that Locked On Yukon is on the rise. And how long has the show been on?
Not that long, man. We Lockdown Podcast Network has been around for a while. I reached out to them about doing a UConn show. Went through some some negotiations, some thoughts with them about where how they wanted to structure the show and everything that goes with it. And it really only started last week. Really, is the first show. We have 60 subscribers and growing. Keep liking and commenting. I always try to reach out to anybody that comments and respond. And even if you don't agree with the take, I'll always respond. One way or the other. So it's all good. I'm not going to be 100% right, but when UConn's playing the way they are, it's easy to make predictions when they're playing well.
There you go. Well, I mean, right here at the Jacksonian, all opinions on everything are welcome right here. Except for like one or two that are like big no nos, but other than that, we're good to go. But for everybody to check you out, there's twitter.com/MarkZanetto, CBB. Let's get him to 3,000, then the 4,000, and so on and so forth. You can check out Locked On UConn on Twitter and on YouTube. You can find them wherever you find your local podcast, on Spotify, Apple, all kinds of stuff.
That's correct.
And, this was a great episode. And again, thank you so much for coming on episode 20 of the Jacksonian, Mark. And as for the audience, I am 199 subs away as of this episode. I'm 199 subs away from 500 subs. And I'm hoping to get there with your help. So if you want to help me get there, just check out youtube.com/@JacksonJohnson979. You can also give me a follow on Twitter and Instagram and Threads, where I just kind of run my mouth about what's going on in the sports world, pop culture, all sorts of stuff. I just kind of run my mouth about Tennessee. And again, sorry in advance to Tennessee, and especially to the Mrs. that's a Tennessee fan. So sorry about that.
All good. It's all good.
So, everybody, stay safe, stay warm, have a wonderful night. You soon.